The title of this talk is Dead Language Talking, Latin for All in the 21st Century. And my name is Melinda Letts of Jesus College, Oxford. When I was a child learning Latin, the cool kids used to chant a little rhyme. Latin is a language as dead can be. It killed the ancient Romans and now it's killing me. I wasn't one of the cool kids because I really liked Latin from the start. But that rhyme came back to me often when I began teaching Latin 10 years ago. I hated the fact that this beautiful language, which had given me access to so much literature and history and had helped me understand so much about my own language, had turned into something that was regarded as irrelevant to most people's education and was increasingly accessible only to a tiny minority of school children, almost all of them privately educated. To be precise, in 2018, 53% of independent schools offered Latin and 26% offered classical Greek, compared to 8% and 1% of state schools, respectively. Today, I want to talk about why I believe the opportunity to learn Latin should be wrested back from the private sector, and to explain why that is not an impossible dream. So first of all, the opportunity to learn Latin should be wrested back from the private sector. My argument here rests on the educational and socio-economic advantages conferred by studying Latin. In a recent review contextualizing a century of US data on the impact of learning Latin, Evelyn Brack and Kerry Bradshaw reported that the majority of findings support the claim that Latin helps with vocabulary, comprehension, and reading development for English-speaking pupils. The specific impacts on special educational needs pupils and in socio-economically challenging areas are particularly noteworthy. These findings appear to apply particularly at primary school stage and to be correlated with specific types of pedagogy, and I shall return to that. Brack and Bradshaw cite a flurry of studies reporting, as they put it, significant improvements in English vocabulary among Latin learners in comparison with control groups, either with no foreign language learning or with a modern foreign language. Others reporting, quotes, significant progress with regard to reading and comprehension in comparison with control groups. And finally, several reporting, again I quote, the particular use of Latin instruction for improving the English language skills of pupils with special educational needs. The British charity Classics for All proposes that learning Latin supports language skills by encouraging a structured approach to grammar and a strong foundation for literacy, arguing that knowledge of the Latin roots of many English words enriches children's vocabulary by helping them to understand the meaning of words, to spell them correctly, and to work out what unfamiliar words might mean. Megan Bowler's 2020 report for the Higher Education Policy Institute, A Languages Crisis, ? Highlights what she calls the stimulating relationship between ancient and modern languages, pointing to the way that, as she puts it, grammatical and etymological roots in Latin and Greek offer new perspectives on the workings of English and Romance languages. And in a striking illustration of the socio-economic impact, Classics for All cite, among several powerful case studies, that of Blackpool Sixth Form College, a school situated in an area of high economic deprivation in the north of England. Classics A-level was introduced in 2012. Subsequently, this school, which had never had any applicants to Russell Group universities, secured places for 2 of its pupils at Oxford and Cambridge and several more at other Russell Group universities. When I read reports like this, I find it really quite hard to contain my indignation at the lack of imagination that led curriculum designers simply to strike Latin out of the state education curriculum. Those figures, just to remind you, were 53% of independent schools offering Latin, compared to 8% of state schools, and 26% to 1% offering classical Greek. It is beyond unacceptable that the kind of benefits I've just outlined should be routinely available to private school students and routinely unavailable to their state school counterparts. among whom the particular socio-economic conditions in which the benefits are most needed are most likely to be found. Let's leave aside the persistent evidence that pupils enjoy learning about the ancient world, the cultural enrichment this gives them, and the pleasure they get from knowing something of the ancient languages. Let's even leave aside for now the massive injection of diversity into classical scholarship that we so badly need, and that we could get by widening access to ancient languages rather than leaving students dependent on translations made by a small pool of de facto privileged people. Let us just simply concentrate on literacy and its relationship with children's life chances. Here are some numbers reported by Classics for All from surveys of schools where they have funded the introduction of classics teaching. 90% of pupils in their surveys report that learning Latin has a positive impact on their literacy and their attainment in other subjects. 80% of pupils studying Latin exceed their targets in modern foreign languages. 78% report having a larger vocabulary, and 71% report a better understanding of grammar. A recent report commissioned by Classics for All said, studying Latin had impacted positively on pupils' feelings of self-efficacy, on their beliefs about their capabilities to perform highly and to help determine their futures, especially in relation to university progression. And to bring that picture to life, here are the voices of some of the pupils and teachers who know best how the aspirations of young people from deprived backgrounds can be raised and their prospects enhanced by being given the chance that pupils at 53% of private schools get as a matter of course. First, here's a secondary school pupil from a village near Bristol who said, Latin has helped me with my other languages. I would like to be a doctor, and Latin will also help with that. A sixth former from Blackpool Sixth Form College said, doing classics was an amazing opportunity for me. Now I'm going to Cambridge University to study archaeology and Egyptology. The head teacher of a school in Weston-super-Mare, a coastal town with some of the highest indicators of deprivation in England, said, exploring the roots of Latin words empowered pupils who struggle with language. And finally, a teacher at Parkside Community College in Cambridge who said, the students' overriding reaction was of enjoyment, engagement, and thirst to learn more. They were fascinated by the links between Greek and their own languages. And very often English as an additional language students found themselves excelling through having a knowledge of a similar alphabet system or knowing cognates. The pervasive image of Latin and Greek as the preserve of the privileged presents a constant challenge to attempts to improve the chances of children such as these. And the fact that it is the preserve of the privileged is entirely the result of government education policy. We need to keep reminding governments that restricting the teaching of classical languages does not remove social division, but helps to entrench it. So this is all very well, you may be thinking, but how can anything possibly change in practice? Is this not just an impossible dream? In the real world, the humanities are struggling for space with STEM subjects. And anyway, the whole world wants to learn English. And if you want to talk to someone who hasn't learned English, all you need to do is open Google Translate. Here in the UK, since the abolition in 2004 of the requirement to take a language up to GCSE, the very idea that studying a foreign language is normal or achievable is moribund. And a language that is as dead can be, a language that is regularly caricatured in the press as a weapon in the quarrels of elitist Etonian politicians, such a language is surely going to have a lower priority than any others for space in a crowded curriculum. Well, as I've argued earlier, that sort of thinking does our young people a massive disservice. Going to a state school should not automatically deny children access to the many benefits conferred by learning Latin. The ancients have left us a tool for levelling up in literacy, and it needs to be used. I'm not suggesting a return to the old days in which children were forced to sit in miserable rows struggling with Latin grammar. Quite the contrary, in fact. John Bracey, an African-American Latin teacher working in a Massachusetts middle school, recently identified that type of teaching as one of the main factors behind the overwhelmingly white profile of US Latin classes, and argued that if an approach leads to a shocking lack of diversity, then that approach should not be used in the classroom. That approach has traditionally involved subjecting children to an entirely passive experience in which they are required to memorize page after page of grammatical tables for use in the laborious decipherment of sentences in which the words appear to have been deliberately disordered just to fox them. Learning Latin that way is slow and often devoid of joy, and it surely contributed to Latin getting the chop from the state curriculum. What I would offer in its place is active Latin. That is, Latin teaching which uses Latin as the primary medium of communication in the classroom, otherwise known as the direct method. In this method, the student speaks and listens rather than simply reading and occasionally writing. And it is this method that Brack and Bradshaw suggest may be particularly responsible for the impact of Latin on English language development. Active Latin directly challenges the idea that learning languages is a specialist skill that only some people have. If you think about it for a moment, that is a ridiculous idea. Language is communication. Communication is what humans do. If we don't communicate, we die. Learning language is a fundamental human skill, and it's among the first things we do. Hearing and speaking a language, as Justin Slocum Bailey recently put it, are primary mental acts in the sense that the human brain has parts and processes dedicated to them. What is not a fundamental human skill is the ability to learn by studying grammar tables. None of us did that when we were acquiring our mother tongues. We learned by listening and speaking, and then a bit later we added in reading and writing. Active Latin adopts the same principle. Thus, it treats Latin as a language, as a means of communication, rather than a fiendish code dreamt up by Cicero 2,000 years ago in order to make the lives of 21st century students miserable. And not surprisingly, active Latin is attractive to students. Studies show a noticeable correlation between active pedagogies and greater demographic diversity of students opting to study Latin and then continuing with the subject. I can personally testify to its effectiveness too, because this is the sort of teaching we use in the Oxford Latinitas project, and which I have now introduced in my two Oxford colleges, Jesus and Harris Manchester. And if you remember just one thing about active Latin from this presentation, I would like it to be that it works, in that it noticeably speeds up the process of language acquisition. And actually, one other thing too, students really enjoy it. Time constraints don't permit me to go into much more detail, but I want briefly to emphasize three more things about it. First, we are not teaching Latin conversation. We're not teaching people to speak Latin for its own sake. We are using speaking as a means of learning to read. It's a pedagogical tool, in other words, a means to an end. And that end is that students should be able to read Latin authors with fluency and confidence. Second, active Latin by no means ignores grammar. On the contrary, the course book we use teaches grammar very thoroughly. Speaking actually encourages students to think more about grammar, not less, because they immediately see the impact of it. If you don't use the right endings, then the people you're talking to are likely to get the wrong end of the stick and fail to understand you. So active Latin actively demonstrates the value of grammar and motivates students to get their heads around it. And finally, I'd like to address a concern that I've sometimes heard, that teachers worry that students from less privileged backgrounds might find using Latin in the classroom intimidating. My answer to that is that it's a teacher's job to be alive to anything that makes students feel nervous and to help them. Anyone who does any teaching meets students who are reluctant to speak in class, even in English. Students who don't want to say anything for fear of making a mistake. students who are nervous of giving a presentation and so on. Good teachers know that students feel nervous about some things. They notice when they do, and they help them develop the confidence to overcome their nerves. That is surely preferable to denying students something that has got proven ability to help them learn on the grounds that it might at first seem scary. So, to conclude, in Latin, the ancients left us not only what John Bracey has called a beautiful language that unlocks a world of wonder, but one with the power to engage our least privileged students and help drive social change. They left us what has turned out to be a powerful tool for levelling up and ironing out social disparities, outcomes that would quite possibly have the Victorian grammarians revolving in their graves. And we can get this to the children who need it most in an enjoyable and effective manner by bringing Active Latin to our schools. Active Latin should be offered in every school in the land. Meanwhile, anyone who wants to know more about it is warmly invited to contact me at Jesus College, Oxford. Thank you very much.